Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload all things true crime related, education related, with a bit of psychology chucked in there as well. And if you haven't already checked over on my second channel, I upload regularly on there all things sort of fashion, beauty, lifestyle, vlogs, hauls, things like that. So if you want to see more content from me, then check that out. The link will be in the description box, but it is just Caitlin Rose Vlogs on YouTube. So today I'm back with another mysterious case, and this one's slightly different because it's more of a medical mystery more than anything, but it is still very much, I guess, a true crime case. I don't know, it's just a little bit different, but the second that I read this online while doing my research, I was just fascinated and absolutely baffled. So for today's video, we're going to be discussing the case of GLORIA Ramirez, also known as the Toxic Lady. It's a very, very strange case. Before I jump into the details, I'm just going to check in my usual disclaimer that I like to include at the start of all my videos. Just letting you guys know that I'm not claimed to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases that I cover over on my channel. I'm simply relaying the information I'm able to find myself through certain sources on the internet, and because only certain sources are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, leave things out, or mispronounce things. I apologise if I do any of that. I'm not trying to cause anyone any harm or injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I do have available to me. And with all that being said, if you want to hear about the case of GLORIA Ramirez, also known as the Toxic Lady, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. So this case begins on February the 19th, 1994 in the Riverside General Hospital in Southern California. Paramedics had rushed into the emergency room, wheeling in a young woman they'd attended to and set her up in a bed in Trauma Room 1. This woman's name was GLORIA Ramirez. She was born on January the 11th in 1963 in Riverside, and at the time of this case having happened, at the time of her being admitted into hospital, she was 31 years old, married with 2 children. According to her close friends and family, GLORIA was known to bring a lot of joy and happiness to those around her, and she was particularly known for having such a brilliant sense of humour. Just a few weeks prior to her admittance into hospital on this day in February, she had actually received a formal diagnosis from her doctors as having something called metastatic cervical cancer. So she was in the very, very late stages of cervical cancer. But on this day in particular, she had been rushed into hospital as she was experiencing a rapid heart rate and a drastic drop in blood pressure, both of which she'd only noticed once she'd shown extreme difficulty in breathing. When the paramedics en route to the hospital had attempted to keep her lucid because she was in and out of consciousness, they were trying to ask her questions, make sure she was still conscious, and they found that she had the ability to respond to the questions, but only in sentences that made absolutely no sense. After reaching the hospital and after learning of her cancer diagnosis, doctors had assumed that this would be an explanation for her deteriorating condition. But then just 15 minutes after being admitted into the emergency room, GLORIA had gone into full cardiac arrest. A nurse on call had initially drawn blood in order for them to carry out the regular procedures in a code blue situation, but it was at this point that when she pulled the blood in a syringe, she had noticed an overwhelming rancid smell. And when the on-call doctors and nurses had attempted to remove her shirt, they had noticed that she had this like oily sheen all over her, which they had thought was a bit strange, but not necessarily relating to her medical condition at that current moment. And someone had also pointed out that she had a fruity garlicky smell coming out of her mouth. The scent of this sort of rancid smell that the nurse had noticed had just seemed so strong that she'd taken a sniff of the syringe, as it just seemed to be emanating from this blood sample, and because of the smell she passed out immediately. The doctor attending to GLORIA, her name was Dr. Julie Gorchinsky. She had reached straight to the aid of this nurse who had suddenly fallen ill, and once she checked all was okay with the nurse, she suddenly noticed this same foul odour coming from this syringe. So she sniffed it and she once again passed out. Just prior to passing out, she had noticed that in the syringe there seemed to be these strange brown coloured little particles, almost like crystals, floating in the blood in the syringe. And this was also confirmed by another doctor in the room as well, and this was just very unusual. They did not know what could have caused this. Not only did these 2 members of staff pass out instantly from smelling this foul odour, but 4 other hospital staff members in the room passed out not long after. The paramedics who had admitted GLORIA into the hospital, as well as the director of the emergency room in the hospital, had all returned to the room once they'd heard the commotion of the code blue, followed by numerous members of staff passing out and falling ill, and they hadn't noticed noticed any sort of smell or felt as though they were going to pass out. Once the members of staff who had passed out had all come to again, they informed the others that they thought that the cause of them feeling unwell had been this foul odour seeping from the blood sample, and the hospital staff had sprung into action under the assumption that the patient was suffering with some form of toxic contamination. The staff sealed off the emergency room and began evacuating all of the patients that had been unaffected by this whatever illness it was, the mysterious incident, although a number of other members of staff at this point had too found themselves feeling ill or passing out as a result of the odour, and they'd all come into contact in some way with GLORIA. Roughly around 10 staff members at this point had fallen ill. The County Decontamination Unit had to be called into the scene to assess it, as like I said, they were acting under the assumption there had been some level of toxicity in the strange incident, so they wanted to check the surrounding areas, the emergency room, the hospital, to see if there was some form of chemical leak or just some sort of contamination. Amongst all the chaos, GLORIA remained in a state of cardiac arrest and medical concern, and the emergency room staff, who were all still in attendance while the area was being sealed, had attempted to resuscitate her for over 35 minutes. Sadly, GLORIA Ramirez did not survive and passed away in the emergency room. According to the official reports, her cause of death had been listed as kidney failure as a result of her diagnosed cancer, and following her passing, her body had to be sealed up and taken to a coroner in a quarantined unit for the autopsy to be carried out, since the foul odour and the strange illness had yet to be explained. And by the end of that night, a total of 23 people had fallen ill following the admittance and having come near GLORIA. Dr. Gorczynski, one of the first people to have fallen ill after coming into contact with GLORIA, had appeared to have suffered the worst. She was suffering from extreme convulsions and irregular shallow breathing. A later diagnosis found that she was also then suffering from hepatitis, pancreatitis, and a condition in her knees called a vascular necrosis. And this condition, once developed, meant that it would cause the bone tissue literally to gradually die and deteriorate, so parts of her knees were dying. As a result, she would remain in crutches and struggle to walk for months after the incident. Following the autopsy, a lot of tests and reports remained inconclusive. In order to narrow down any other potential explanations for the baffling occurrence, the hospital sent in a hazmat team to examine the hospital's emergency room in order to determine whether this had been as a result of some form of chemicals that maybe had been the source of the problem, but this was all ruled as a negative. And what happened in the hospital that evening became one of the largest and most baffling medical mysteries in more recent years. As the incident remained a mystery for some time, more and more researchers had attempted to research the strange occurrence in hopes of just providing an explanation. One research facility in particular examined the autopsy and toxicology reports taken from GLORIA Ramirez's remains, and they also then, I believe, conducted a second autopsy, and their analysis of the results had suggested that there had been a number of unexpected chemicals within her blood. None of these chemicals had been anywhere near as high in toxicity as they would have needed in order to cause the entire incident within the hospital. There were a significant number of drugs and medications in her system at the time of death as well. However, when these were examined, they discovered that the majority of these had been painkillers, both prescribed from a doctor and also sort of self-medicated, and this would have been, expected from a woman suffering from a very late stage of cancer. The staff members inside the emergency room at the time of discovering the unsettling smell had described it as being a very strong ammonia scent, and the cause of this was quickly discovered, or they kind of had a theory as to what had caused the smell of ammonia. They found that there had been an ammonia compound present in her blood. They determined that this compound was likely the creation of her body processing and breaking down a specific anti-nausea drug that she had been taking, likely to alleviate her symptoms of the cancer. There was one chemical in particular, though, that had been specifically strange to the medical researchers. They had discovered something called Dimethylsulfone in her blood, and this is sometimes found as a natural product in human beings relating to amino acids, but it's most commonly present in plants and in trace amounts in select food and drinks. In some cases, the discovery of this being present in a patient's blood may not have been concerning or unusual, but there was a considerably large amount present in GLORIA's blood and in her tissues. They determined that such a large concentration of the chemical had likely been the result of a pain relief medication that she was likely prescribing herself in attempt to alleviate her symptoms of a cancer in the form of something called dimethylsulfoxide, or Dmso. In short, Dmso was a wildly popular pain relief drug used throughout the 1960s, usually found being used by athletes or athletic clubs and sportsmen as a means of treating extreme muscle pulls and tears and strains to enable them to keep up with their training, and it was often found in like a cream form, so you rub it onto your skin. Not long after Dmso was shot into common household use, it was announced that the long-term use of the drug would then lead to the deterioration and damage of the person's eyes. Following this discovery, it was then used in a very limited capacity and could only be given as a treatment in a very specific formula, but despite this it was still distributed extensively to households through illegal and non-official means. It was theorised that this is how Gloria had such high concentration of it in her system, as she'd maybe taken it as a form of pain relief. More specifically, like I said, that it had been applied to her skin in the form of like a solution, like a cream, and then absorbed into her bloodstream. When Gloria had been admitted into hospital, the staff had given her oxygen as a means of improving her condition, but this then led to the oxidization of the dimethylsulfoxide, creating dimethylsulfone. Researchers at the time had believed that possibly this new formed substance had then crystallized and created the unusual brownish crystals that the staff had noticed in the blood sample in the syringe. From what I could understand, bearing in mind my knowledge of this sort of area is very limited, dimethylsulfone is relatively harmless by itself. However, it does have the ability to create something called dimethyl sulfate relatively easily if an additional oxygen molecule is added. And dimethyl sulfate is an extremely harmful chemical that has the ability to kill cells where exposed, and if the body absorbs it, it can lead to severe convulsions, liver, kidney and heart damage, as well as potential paralysis and even a comatose state, amongst other issues. It was believed at the time that this conversion into dimethyl sulfate is what occurred in Gloria's case. However, this is just theorised. What exactly caused this conversion, if it did happen, has been up for debate for some years now. The initial researchers investigating the autopsy reports had speculated that they believed it was the result of the air in the emergency room being chilled and constantly circulating. However, this, like I said, is just a theory and evidence for this is lacking. The belief in the conversion occurring in the first place has been disputed itself, as many scientists have said there has been no since evidence of this ever actually happening directly, as well as suggesting that the illness and the symptoms displayed by the affected hospital staff did not fully match dimethyl sulfate poisoning symptoms. Aside from this, many have said that if it did, it would have taken hours for these symptoms to have shown themselves in the affected hospital staff, as opposed to the virtually instant and immediate effects that they seem to display. So in fact, the theory of the symptoms being related to Dmso is exactly that. It's a proposed theory. An alternative theory has been since suggested years later by a newspaper reporter that proposed that the hospital staff had actually been illegally producing and distributing methamphetamines, or the chemicals required to make methamphetamine, in large quantities, specifically that they had been smuggling these chemicals into IV bags. Now, it's known that the area had been a very large and popular distributor for methamphetamines at the time, and so I think a lot of this theory is based off of that knowledge. This theory goes that a member of staff had made a mistake and they'd accidentally hooked up Gloria to one of these IV bags as opposed to a regular one, and this may have been the cause of her sudden deterioration. However, this theory is relatively wild in a sense. It's seemingly based on little to no evidence, so I doubt the credibility of this theory heavily, but it also isn't entirely possible. I wouldn't rule it out. When researching this case online, the theory that you'll see pop up potentially the most is the concept of mass hysteria. In later years, a pair of scientists had interviewed a number of the staff members that had been working in the hospital that night, and they had basically put the events down of that evening to mass hysteria triggered by the unexpected and overwhelming smell that they'd smelt coming from the patient. Dr. Gorczynski and the nurse that had taken the blood sample from Gloria directly had both continually denied that this was the case, and Dr. Gorczynski specifically had taken it to the level of filing a lawsuit against the county regarding these claims, namely because her diagnosed condition following the incident, which was a vascular necrosis, really could not be caused by mass hysteria. During the lawsuit, she shared her disdain at the claims, stating that each of the affected staff members, bearing in mind there was 23 staff members in total, they were all professionally trained and they would be used to coming across unexpected and foul odours in their day-to-day tasks. And so mass hysteria would either have not occurred at all because they were professionally trained, or it would have occurred on a daily basis. There were claims that a potential explanation of the medical occurrence had been the poor conditions found inside the hospital. This theory is based off of the reports that a poisonous gas had been released accidentally in an incident in 1991, and as a result of this accidental leak, 2 hospital staff members ended up being hospitalised. And then 2 years later, an inspection of the building had led to the discovery of large traces of sewer gas being present in the emergency room, and this theory was particularly supported by GLORIA's family. A lot of GLORIA's family members said that the hospital's conditions were not up to code and they had a lot of issues within the hospital, and this is what caused her sudden reaction and deterioration in her condition. Aside from the majority of this case being extremely strange in general, there were a number of strange occurrences also attached to the case. Firstly, the syringe containing GLORIA's blood that had led to such drastic health symptoms in the hospital staff had been thrown away, allegedly by accident. GLORIA's family at this point had decided to file a malpractice suit and a wrongful death lawsuit against the county, as they were convinced that the hospital and its staff either had more involvement in her death than they were letting on, or they had more knowledge of it. The next strange occurrence had been that the coroner who had carried out the initial autopsy on GLORIA's remains had initially filed a report stating that he believed her death had not been the result of natural causes. However, he then suddenly altered his official findings to state that he believed it had been the result of natural causes. Finally, it was then discovered that a woman named Stephanie Albright, who had been an official investigator working on behalf of the coroner's office, had committed suicide only a month into being assigned GLORIA's case. So they're not necessarily linked to GLORIA's death, but they're all just strange occurrences that have occurred since the case has come about, which I thought were worth noting. For nearly 3 decades now, there have been no conclusive answers as to what had happened to GLORIA, and it remains one of the largest medical mysteries of all time. GLORIA Ramirez was buried in Olivewood Memorial Park 2 months after her death in April of 1994, and she left behind a loving family, a husband and 2 children. I really do hope, for the sake of all of GLORIA's loved ones, that some answers can be given soon as to what actually occurred to GLORIA, what her medical condition really was, and what this sudden deterioration was triggered by, and that if there is someone else to blame, whether it be the hospital or something else, that they are reprimanded for it suitably. So that is everything I have to discuss today. Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, I love reading through your guys' theories. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.